They disappear. No warning, no fight, no closure, just gone. Like a shadow fading at dawn. At first, you don't believe it. You tell yourself that they're just busy, that maybe something happened, that any moment now, they'll call. But the days pass. The messages stay unanswered. And slowly, reality starts to burn through your denial. They're not coming back. And that silence, it's not peaceful. It's violent. It screams louder than any argument ever could. Because when someone leaves without a word, they don't just take themselves. They take every question they never let you ask. They take the closure you deserved. And they leave you haunted by unfinished sentences. You start to think maybe it was something you said. Maybe it was something you did. Maybe if you'd been quieter, softer, easier to love, they would have stayed. But let me tell you something. Their silence isn't a reflection of your failure. It's a mirror of their fear. They didn't disappear because you were too much. They disappeared because you were real in a world that runs from real. You looked them in the eyes and saw them. Not the version they show the world, but the one they hide from themselves. And when you see someone that deeply, they only have two choices: rise to meet your honesty or run from it. They chose to run. And that stings, doesn't it? Because they didn't even have the courage to tell you why. They just vanished, leaving your mind to do what it always does when it hurts: search for meaning in the ruins. You replay the last conversation 100 times, like rewinding a movie that never gave you the ending. You check their online status, scroll through old photos, read old messages just to feel something familiar again. But all you find is silence. And silence is a cruel teacher. It teaches you how to sit in uncertainty. It teaches you that not every story gets an explanation. And it teaches you, painfully, that the people who can't face their own chaos will always leave you carrying it for them. Still, the sting changes. At first it burns like betrayal. But slowly it becomes something else. Clarity. Because you start to see that what vanished wasn't love. It was illusion. What disappeared wasn't your person, it was your lesson. And the silence they left behind, the one that used to hurt so bad, it starts to sound different. Less like punishment, more like space. Space for you to breathe, space for you to grow, space for you to finally hear your own voice again. So let it sting, let it ache. Let it burn through every ounce of you that still clings to their ghost, because the pain of their silence is what wakes you up to the sound of your own strength. People don't always disappear because something went wrong. Sometimes they vanish because something went too right. You showed them what honesty feels like, what depth sounds like, what it means to be seen, fully, nakedly, without disguise. And that kind of truth, it's unbearable for those still living behind masks. So they retreat, not out of hatred, not out of anger, but out of fear. The kind that sinks deep, the kind that whispers, "I'm not enough for this." But they'll never admit that. No, they'll say nothing. They'll pretend vanishing was easier than staying. Because silence gives them control, or at least the illusion of it. See, disappearing without a word isn't power. It's avoidance dressed as mystery. It's immaturity pretending to be peace. It's the quiet confession that they couldn't handle the gravity of your soul. They'll tell themselves they outgrew you, that you changed. But the truth is, they couldn't keep up. They mistook your clarity for confrontation, your honesty for judgment, your depth for danger. They wanted the idea of connection, not the work of it. They wanted to be admired, not understood, loved, but never challenged. And when you came along, unfiltered, present, demanding realness, they saw themselves too clearly in your reflection. And it scared them. Because when you've built your life on running from your own shadows, meeting someone who sees right through you feels like standing under a floodlight with nowhere to hide. That's why they left. Not because you were difficult, but because you were truthful. And truth breaks people who aren't ready to face it. So don't chase explanations from those who can't even explain themselves. Don't beg for closure from those who are still closed off to their own emotions. Their silence is their confession. It tells you everything you need to know. They were never ready for the weight of something real. And maybe that's the point. Maybe their absence isn't a wound. It's a filter. A way for life to remove those who can't walk beside the version of you that's growing. So stop asking why they vanished. Start asking why you ever settled for someone who could. After they vanish, the world doesn't end. But it feels like it does. The mornings are quieter, the air feels heavier. Every place you used to share becomes a ghost town of memories. You sit in the stillness they left behind, and it's not just emptiness. It's echo. Echo of laughter, of plans, of all the things you thought would last. And that echo cuts deep, because silence after connection is a strange kind of violence. It doesn't just take the person. It takes the version of you that existed when they were here. You start to realize that grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about absence. The kind that lingers in the spaces where love used to live. You open your phone, scroll through old conversations, and the words hit different now. The warmth behind them feels like a lie. The promises sound like smoke. You tell yourself not to care, not to think about it, not to check their name again. But you do. Because part of you still wants to believe that maybe, somewhere, there's an answer. But there isn't. And the truth starts to whisper beneath the ache. That maybe closure was never meant to come from them. Because this void, it's not just loss. It's transformation. It's the space life carves out when it's preparing to fill you with something new. But before that happens, you have to sit in it. You have to feel it. You have to let it break you open. Because that's how growth begins. Not with comfort, but with collapse. The void teaches you what nothing else can. That you can survive without what you thought you needed. That you can still breathe when the air feels too thin. That your heart can keep beating even when it's cracked. And slowly, almost invisibly, you start to rebuild. Not because the pain disappears, but because you do something stronger than healing. You adapt. You learn to live in the silence they left behind. And eventually, that silence becomes something else. Not emptiness, but space. Not loneliness, but freedom. Because the void they left was never meant to be filled by them again. It was meant to be filled by you. Your peace, your purpose, your presence. That's the truth no one tells you. The pain doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're being rebuilt. Piece by piece. Breath by breath. Until one day, the void isn't a wound anymore. It's the place where you found yourself again. Every disappearance carries a lesson wrapped in pain. It doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't ask permission. It crashes into your life, destroys the illusion, and dares you to grow. You see, life doesn't send closure. It sends mirrors. And the people who vanish are mirrors of everything you needed to face. They reflect your attachment, your expectations, your tendency to hold on too tightly. They reveal where your love was conditional, where your self-worth depended on someone else's presence. It's brutal, isn't it? Realizing that what hurt the most wasn't their silence. It was what their silence revealed about you. You start to see the pattern. How often you've tried to earn love by being more understanding, more patient, more forgiving. How often you've mistaken endurance for strength. But the lesson is different this time. Because this pain doesn't want you to wait for their apology. It wants you to outgrow the need for one. You learn that closure doesn't come wrapped in someone else's words. It's born the moment you decide to stop searching for validation in places that only gave you emptiness. You learn that love isn't about holding on. It's about recognizing when letting go is the most loving thing you can do. Not for them, for yourself. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. You don't heal by getting answers. You heal by accepting that some stories are meant to end mid-sentence. Because what if the point was never about why they left? What if the real lesson was about why you kept opening doors to people who were never meant to stay? The ones who disappear without explanation teach you that your peace is not a gift to be given. It's a boundary to be guarded. They teach you that love without respect is just attachment in disguise. That attention without effort is a trap. That someone showing up is not the same as someone staying. And when that finally clicks, when you stop romanticizing inconsistency, when you stop craving the ones who leave, you step into a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't beg. The kind that doesn't chase. The kind that doesn't confuse silence with mystery, but sees it for what it is. Absence. You stop searching for meaning in their vanishing act and start creating meaning in your own rebirth. Because the truth is, every person who disappears from your life is a message written in the language of endings. And that message is simple. It's time to remember who you are without them. That's the real lesson hidden inside the loss. Not how to get them back, but how to never lose yourself again. There comes a moment when the ache begins to fade, not because it's gone, but because you've learned to live around it. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes something else. A kind of strange peace. A quiet strength that doesn't need to be loud to be real. This is the part no one talks about. The moment after the breakdown, after the tears, after the endless questions, when you finally stop reaching for what left you. And that moment, that's when you're reborn. Not into someone new, but into who you were before the world taught you to doubt your own worth. You begin to move differently. You stop waiting for apologies that will never come. You stop explaining yourself to people who are never really listening. You stop trying to make others see your value, because now you do. The pain becomes your teacher. The silence becomes your sanctuary. And slowly, the pieces of you that once scattered in heartbreak start to come back together. Stronger, sharper, wiser. You start to see the pattern. How every disappearance stripped away what was never meant for you. How every loss was secretly protection. How the emptiness made room for expansion. And it clicks. Maybe you never lost anything at all. Maybe what vanished was just what couldn't follow you to your next chapter. Because this version of you, the one standing in the ashes, the one who learned to breathe again, is no longer someone who needs to be chosen. You choose yourself every morning, every moment. That's the rebirth. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. It's quiet, grounded, unshakable. It's the moment you stop trying to resurrect the past and start building the future. So let them go. Let the silence stay silent. Let their absence stay empty. Because the real story is no longer about who left. It's about who you became because they did. And when you finally rise, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of peace, that's when the world feels it. That's when the universe moves differently around you. Because now, you're no longer waiting to be found. You found yourself. And in that moment, you realize the ones who disappeared were never the loss. They were the spark that lit the fire that brought you back to life. There's a truth most people never face. Not everyone who walks into your life is meant to stay. Some people are lessons dressed as love. Some are tests disguised as comfort. And some are mirrors, reflecting the parts of you that still needed healing. You can spend years asking why they left, but the real question, the one that hurts and heals at the same time, is why you kept holding on to someone who had already let go. We romanticize loyalty, even when it's destroying us. We call it love when it's really fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing the silence without someone to fill it. But the truth, you can't lose what was never yours to keep. You can only delay the moment you finally let go. Because when people vanish, they don't just walk out of your life. They reveal something about your life. They show you what kind of love you've been tolerating. They expose how much of yourself you've been giving to people who never had the capacity to receive it. It's not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the universe stripping away what you begged it to protect. Because deep down, you knew it wasn't right. And that realization, it burns. It humbles you. But it also frees you. Because once you confront that truth, you stop chasing ghosts. You stop confusing attachment with love. You stop mistaking attention for care. You start to understand that not everyone who disappears is a villain. Some people just reach the edge of their own capacity and break. And maybe you were never meant to fix them. Maybe you were meant to witness their exit and finally choose yourself. That's the confrontation. The moment when you stop waiting for people to come back and start walking forward without apology. You stop checking the door every time it creaks. You stop rereading old messages looking for meaning. You stop asking the universe to bring them back and start thanking it for taking them away. Because that's when it hits you. Every person who vanished made space for someone who won't. Every unanswered message became a silence that taught you self-respect. Every ending was an invitation to evolve. So no, it's not your job to chase. It's not your duty to understand the minds of those who never understood your heart. Your only responsibility is to keep becoming the kind of person who no longer settles for half-love or disappearing acts. Reality doesn't always give you closure. It gives you truth. And truth, though brutal, will always give you freedom. Because once you stop running from reality, once you face it head-on with your scars and your strength, you realize that being left was never the real tragedy. The real tragedy would have been staying small enough to make the wrong ones comfortable. And now, after the silence, the pain, the loss, the lesson, comes the rise. The moment you finally stop looking backward, the moment the ache turns into armor, the moment you realize the storm wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to rebuild you. You've cried enough tears to drown entire versions of yourself. You've replayed every moment, begged for answers that never came. You've carried guilt that was never yours to bear. But now, it's time to put it down. Because this is where you begin again. Not as the broken one, not as the abandoned one, but as the one who survived it all and still refused to close their heart. There's a certain power in being left, and choosing to stay soft. There's a strength in not letting bitterness write your story. You start to see that forgiveness isn't for them. It's for your own peace. It's the final act of freedom. And when you rise differently. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you never needed them to be right. You walk lighter because you finally understand that their disappearance was never about your lack of worth. It was about their lack of readiness. And that's not your burden anymore. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes your pulse, a rhythm reminding you that you made it through. You stood in the emptiness and didn't disappear. You turned loss into wisdom. You turned silence into strength. Now, every step you take echoes with power. Every breath you draw is a declaration. I am still here, not waiting, not wanting, but walking, forward, whole, unshaken. Because you finally understand, what vanishes from your life isn't the end. It's the clearing for what's real, for who's real, for what's meant. And when those new souls arrive, the ones who match your healed energy, who see you without running, who stay without needing to be asked, you'll know. You'll know that everything that disappeared was simply making space for what was always meant to find you. So rise. Not quietly, not timidly, but fiercely, with all the fire that pain tried to extinguish. Rise knowing that closure was never the goal. Freedom was. Rise knowing that you don't need them to return. You've already come home to yourself. Because when someone vanishes without explanation, it doesn't mean your story ended. It means the next chapter finally began. And this time, you're not the one waiting to be chosen. You're the one who chooses. You choose peace. You choose growth. You choose you. That's the rise. That's the power. That's the rebirth after disappearance. There's a moment, quiet, sacred, that comes after the storm. It's not loud like the pain was. It doesn't demand attention like the heartbreak did. It's subtle, like a breath you didn't know you were holding, finally being released. That's freedom. The kind that doesn't need to be announced. It's simply felt. You start to wake up without the heaviness. You stop checking your phone. You stop waiting for explanations that no longer matter. You stop feeling haunted by the what-ifs. Because you finally understand. The story ended where it needed to. And instead of resentment, you feel gratitude. Not for how they left, but for what their leaving gave you. They taught you how to stand in the ruins and still rebuild. They showed you what it means to love without losing yourself. They forced you to find out who you are when no one is clapping, when no one is holding your hand, when no one is saving you. And that lesson, that kind of self-knowledge, is worth every ounce of pain it took to earn it. Because the freedom you have now isn't the kind that comes from escape. It's the kind that comes from acceptance. You've stopped needing closure because you became it. You've stopped craving their return because you returned to yourself. And you've stopped looking for peace in someone else's presence because you've built it in your own solitude. That's the afterglow. The quiet radiance of someone who's no longer ruled by what left. The soft confidence of someone who knows their own value. The calm of someone who no longer chases, because what's meant for them will never need to be chased. You realize now, people will still come and go. Some will stay, some will fade. But none of it will ever shake you like before, because you no longer fear loss. And now, you move differently, not guarded, just grounded. not cynical, just wise. You love again, not because you forget, but because you finally remember.